Welcome back to Cookie Pocket. This is episode 74, and I'm joined by Christian and Mitchell, as always. Today, we are talking about not the oldest film we've ever discussed, but quite possibly the most influential, because we're talking about Metropolis from 1927. Now, when I rehearsed this introduction, I started by saying, it's a pretty simple story, and then I realized that as I was describing the story, it sounded not simple at all. Essentially, it's about a futuristic world where, at least in this one city, it's divided between the sprawling metropolis of the Overcity, which is populated mostly by the rich, and then you have the Undercity, where the poor and the workers live, and they work the machines that keep the upper city running, and they're essentially the engine that runs the entire city and keeps the rich rich, while the poor remain poor. As the film terms it, they're the hands of the city, whereas the rich are the head of the city. And out of this system comes a man who is the son of the man Joe Fredersen, who runs all of Metropolis, who might possibly be a mediator between the two. I'm skipping out on a lot of aspects of the plot, but that's because there's quite a few more layers to this than I initially thought. But that's kind of the heart of the story, is that binary between the rich, the poor, and the upper city and the lower city. So, let's just jump right into it. What did you guys think of Metropolis?
Christian can go first.
Well, Zach.
Sometimes I think.
Sometimes I think too much. But this time I didn't think too much. I decided that this was a good film and worthy of a 4 out of 5, the same as you gave it. So I think that masterwork is probably a deserved term for this, given that this was made in 1927. On a technical level, I have no idea how any of this was achieved. And on a personal level, I have that same sense of wonder because the extras in this are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it would be difficult enough to coordinate a handful of big scenes with big crowds and whatnot. And like the first time you really see the, I forget what it's called, but sort of the poor section of this place. Mm-hmm. You see these like masses of workers, and I was sort of figuring, okay, this will be like the one scene where they show us what this is like, and then the rest of it will just sort of be iconography and something we're meant to infer moving forward. But there are a lot of big moments in this with massively clamorous crowds, mm-hmm. where everyone just blends in with each other, even the main characters. And it's really, really marvelous because I think in pretty much any film made in recent decades, I think extras really tend to stand out. Yeah. Ironically, by not standing out, because they're all doing like their extra thing instead of just doing what an actor would do. So I thought that was really neat. On a personal note, that's probably what made it work the most for me. But obviously everything that I like owes a ton to this. Obviously, Star Wars owes a ton to this. And, I'm glad this exists. I will just say I feel the responsibility as representative of the proletariat on this podcast that this is still a silent film that demands a ton of your attention and will probably not be a source of entertainment for most people our age.
Okay.
Which is probably the fault of the viewer in most cases, because this is clearly a massive achievement, and everything I like owes a lot to it. So,
okay,
yeah, there. I hope you're happy with your soundbite, Zach.
I'm very happy. That's going on the DVD.
Promotional. Yep. Yeah, I mean, honestly, between the Phantom Carriage and Nosferatu and this, I think I'm like the least relating with Christian when it comes to being like not as entertained by silent film, mm-hmm. for its inherent aspects. And I was like totally invested in it at the end. And I do think the orchestra is like way stand out. Like that is intense, some intense classical music. It makes everything Hans Zimmer does sound like crap, honestly.
Yeah.
Compared to this, like in this case, okay.
Hey, the Dune
there's
score
your
is really
soundbite,
good.
Christian. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like you have to really get used to it in the beginning. It's kind of slow going, and you have to really rely on those like physical performances to really be invested in it. But towards the end, I mean, there's enough like narrative buildup where and there's enough nuance in the characters and enough like plot points where I was thinking, wow, like I wouldn't want someone to spoil this for me, was kind of like my reaction.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because with the Phantom Carriage and even with Nosferatu, like there's only like a couple like major things that you don't really want to, talk about with other people before spoiling it. For this, it's like, there's multiple plot lines going on, forming a central narrative. Like all the parts of a story are totally there. Like thematically, it's just like second to none. It's completely layered with a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of like very risque things too, which I wasn't really expecting. But just this man, freaking Fritz, is a time traveler. Like this guy, I don't know what he did. How did he know we were gonna have prop planes in the Metropolis today? What the heck? But those shots are like magnificent, and even like the visual motifs and everything. Just it really is just very layered and thought out, and you can really tell like heart and soul was put into this entire production. And it totally comes across from beginning to end, especially the acting towards the end, particularly. Well, I guess we'll talk about that later. But all of the central characters perform not very like super exaggerated, especially towards the end. Like all the reactions are very realistic, and it just feels very, it's very easy to get invested in, especially in the last act. And it was a lot of fun. So 4.5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed this one. I think this is a legacy film for a reason. There's certain films, even very, very early films, where even if people haven't seen them, they recognize the iconography because it's sort of just passed into pop culture at this point. So in Metropolis, even people who haven't seen the Machine Man in this film kind of recognize that design. I mean, it's visually similar to C-3PO, but it also shows up in like every book of like sci-fi monsters, and the poster is really iconic, and that typeface as well. And the Machine Man is that design of it, at least, is only in the movie for like 6 or 7 minutes, but it's really iconic in that way. And I pointed out in my review that this is essentially the very first science fiction feature film, and I think its influence registers throughout all of the genre after this. I mean, this is much more, it's a much more kind of gothic religious version of science fiction than I think we see in a lot of other films from the 20th century, but the massive sprawling cityscape is a definite influence on something like Blade Runner or The Fifth Element. The Machine Man is a huge influence on C-3PO, and the shape of the city itself is definitely an influence on later films in like the Star Wars prequels, for instance. I mean, even the sort of dynamic between the workers and the rich, and a lot of the shots with the workers in the Undercity at the beginning of the film went on to influence something like 1984, which the 1984 adaptation of 1984 absolutely draws influence from the way that dynamic and these massive machines are depicted in this film. I find that even if we discount its legacy, though, this was pretty entertaining for me. I mean, I when I first saw this, I was about 12, and I remember thinking like, okay, this is cool, but whew, it's long. But this kind of flew right by for me. I did not feel the length of this on this watch, which surprised me because I remembered this. This movie is 2.5 hours, or at least the cut that we watched, which is as close to the complete cut as you can get nowadays. We'll talk about that later. But I remembered this as like, oh, Metropolis. Metropolis is like 4 hours long. I got to plan a whole afternoon for Metropolis, but it's really not that lengthy. There are other movies that come out nowadays that are bigger kind of like audience draws that aren't as long. Like there are Avengers movies that are longer than this, for instance. So it's not like it's an unpalatable length or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's exciting. I think in a lot of ways still pretty relevant in terms of its themes. Now, it is somewhat simple in terms of its thematics, which we'll also discuss, but I do think that means it's still kind of an impactful watch nowadays. And yeah, for me, it's a 4 out of 5. I think it's really great. But also linking back into the themes, I think it fumbles the bag a little bit toward the end, which maybe we'll talk about additionally too. But
Nice.
Kind of segueing into that, I wanted to start us off with a light, easy question.
All right.
Hitler and Goebbels loved this film.
I knew it. I knew he was going to ask me about Joseph. Don't ask me about Joseph, Zach.
So Hitler and Goebbels both loved this film.
Good for them.
And they considered it emblematic of the Third Reich's goals and aspirations, and even wanted Fritz Lang. I'm not quite sure the correct pronunciation of his name, but they wanted Fritz to make films for the Nazi Party. So with that in mind, I want us to do some speculative thinking here. Why do you think that they related to this film in that strong of a way? And do you think that interpretation is in any way valid? Do you think they're finding something in the film that's meant to be there?
I already thought about this question. I almost
okay.
wrote an answer to it. Okay. I knew you were going to ask me this.
You were ready.
So, no.
Okay.
It's not. Hitler and Goebbels were obviously projecting.
Yeah.
And like Hitler himself saw himself as what's his name?
Mediator.
Why am I?
Freire.
Yeah, as the mediator. And he was like, yeah, we're the mediator between, the upper class Jewish capitalists and the lower class workers and stuff like that. And that's really like a hallmark thing of the National Socialist Party. And obviously the film itself is not really going to that length to describe that kind of thinking. This was kind of more reactionary to World War I. This was more of like emblematic of the main issues that the average person was concerned about in the Weimar Republic. And it certainly is more about the distaste and kind of the distrust of the government and of science and technology as a result of World War I. And I obviously you can totally see how you could kind of pull that from it. But obviously, Hitler, there's tons of very false assumptions associated with those projections. I know Goebbels was like asking him, you could make our next National Socialist film. And they're kind of missing the whole like deep point about it that the mediator between the upper and lower class is kind of like, well, not a Nazi, I guess I'll say. But yeah, I mean, the false presumption history kind of spoke for us in that way, that there's a possibility of this unification and everything, and these kind of the classism and everything is, if anything, is more associated with Marxist thought than anything. Yeah. And the perception that National Socialism is like regular socialism is not necessarily true, and there's a lot of nuance behind that. But yes, in general, this is not a Nazi film. Yeah. You can easily project any rising power that's trying to dispel the previous history and trying to create a new hyper-progressive society. In any facet, you could say we're the mediator between the upper and the lower, and that's really not true in practice at all. So,
yeah, well said. And I would also just emphasize that it's definitely not the fault of the film that one can project onto it in such a way.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to, especially now when everything has been made, to criticize a film for being simple. But I kind of liked that this didn't have any lofty aspirations. You guys might remember when we talked about the Chaplin film. What was that titled again?
The Great Dictator.
The Great Dictator.
Yes. Gosh, sorry for forgetting. Yeah, sometimes I get picky with my satire, and that was one of those cases. I wouldn't even necessarily call it a bad film, but it just didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. Here, is it okay if I delve into the ending?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's kind of, in a sense, anticlimactic. I mean, it's basically just a handshake. Mm-hmm. But I kind of appreciated that, because in that sense, I don't think you could really call this film. You could project critical lenses onto it as you please, but I don't think you could call it a Marxist film or a capitalist film or anything. It portrays like a class conflict pretty clearly, but it doesn't delineate a solution clearly at all beyond just someone who's willing to listen to both sides and to make them like hear each other. And I think there's a sort of naivete in that for sure. I mean, in the real world that doesn't work, but there's also sort of a beauty to that, I think, and in a filmic quality captured the way that Fritz captures it. It was nice. Yeah, I don't know. It made me smile a little bit, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think listening is the solution to everything, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And yeah, it was just nice. It was nice.
Yeah, I do agree with you that I like the kind of simplistic nature of the ending. I like the ending in theory. What I don't love about the ending is if you think about it for more than like 2 seconds, the rich son of the man who runs the entire city is convincing the working class to forgive the fact that he tried to wipe them all out and drown their children, like moments after it happened, which to me seems a little
There's still good in him, Zach. There's still good in him.
It's massively idealistic in a way that I think even...
I was gonna...
No, go ahead, Mitchell.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Zach, but I was saying that kind of plays into the expressionist kind of aspects of it, and like the surreal, perspective where it's you're supposed to be thinking more about the themes rather than like the drawn realistic conclusions.
Sure. So. Yeah, and I admire that, and I really do like expressionism, but I think even Fritz Lang wasn't all that keen on the ending or even this film after he made it. He later said that like he regretted making the ending so simple, and he said there was an interview with Peter Bogdanovich where he said you can't write a movie about class struggle where the mediator between the head and the hands is the heart. That's far too idealistic. That's a fairy tale. Which I do agree with on a certain level, but I think this movie is kind of a future fairy tale in a lot of ways. So I think he's being maybe a little harsh on himself. I do think it's also possible, kind of linking back to the original Nazi point, that Fritz Lang was a little cynical about this film because he wrote it with his wife, and made it with his wife. And then after the Hitler and Goebbels said, "Oh, we love this movie. Can you make Nazi movies for us?" His wife went, "Sure," and joined the Nazi party. And Fritz Lang went, "I don't know if I'm comfortable with that, dear." And they got divorced a year later. And Fritz Lang ended up fleeing the country for America while his wife made Nazi movies in the next several years.
1939.
But I definitely agree with you guys that I think really this movie is just kind of about conflict and somebody rising above that conflict to be a bridge between the two sides. And so really anybody who sees themselves as a leader or a figurehead of any kind could look at this movie and go, "It's about me." I think it's also quite possible that Adolf Hitler was just, or Goebbels was just a bit of a Fritz Lang fanboy, because Fritz Lang later made M, which is about a child murderer whose background is not revealed at all, and the Nazi party went, "Fritz has made a movie about why we need to be afraid of the Jews." And Fritz went, "No!" So I think it's very possible that the Nazi party was just keen to sort of absorb the work of a prominent German filmmaker without really taking into account what he meant behind it at all. But speaking of Fritz, I want to bring him up. I have my whole written out question
He's
here,
got the
similar
book.
to Mitchell. So Fritz Lang gained a reputation as a tyrant on this film. He shot a scene of Frater falling to his knees countless times over the course of 2 full days, after which the actor couldn't even stand up. He ordered extras to run directly into real jets of rushing cold water during the climax, many of whom were starving children. He cast almost entirely inexperienced extras as his leads. The 2 leads were meant to be extras in the film, and he went, "I like them," and put them in his lead roles. And he actually set Bridget Helm on fire during the climax of the film, all in the name of creating the grandest film of all time, because he wanted to make a movie that would rival American budgets. So, with all that in mind, Did he succeed? What do you guys think of the size and scope of this production? Especially, I mean, we kind of talked about the themes already, but especially in comparison to the size and scope of its themes.
Oh, geez.
Poor
Which
kids.
mine do I step on first? Well, I mean, it certainly worked. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it didn't, because it did, man. Gosh, doesn't make it okay, but oof. I guess, almost 100 years removed from the event itself. It's, I mean, I'm glad that we get to witness the fruits of their labor, I guess,
Me and my iPhone.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know where to start with this one. No, nothing that he did was acceptable, but I do like the casting extras out of a crowd type thing, because I think a lot of the time it's better to cast by type. It's just bad to admit to, but I think a lot of people share that sentiment. Acting is just trying to be a certain way, and whilst being that way, convincingly be that way instead of acting to be that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, good God, did he actually set her on fire?
So he insisted that they use real fire, which meant that her dress caught fire and she had to be hurriedly put out by stagehands.
Okay.
So he didn't go, Brigitte, today we're going to set you on fire. But he did go, stand over there and I'm going to light a fire around you.
Okay, that's fine.
During the burning at the stake sequence.
Yes, of course. What was the question again?
Did he succeed, with all that in mind, in making the grandest film of all time to rival even American budgets, do you think?
I'm sure by the standards of that time, I would say sure. But, I mean, I didn't give this a 5, so I guess not. But, how many expectations can you reasonably levy on this production? Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I don't think you could reasonably argue to the other side without submitting some generational differences.
Okay.
Yeah. Weimar Republic, everything dollar is worth nothing. The Reichsmark is worth nothing. Okay, this movie literally should not exist. There's no possible way he could have made this, and yeah, I think it was pretty great. I think it rivals productions of the 40s and 50s in Hollywood. Not to hot take or anything, but I totally think there's a lot of scenes in this that are iconic for a reason. I mean, not only just he FaceTimed Grodd or whatever his name was in the thing, wow, just real life, but the not just the visionary aspects, but just the amount of thought that was put into portraying the themes and even having nuance in their conversations, even though it's just on cards on the screen. And just and a lot of the time, I wanted to mention the conversations that they have. You pretty much know what they're gonna say, but there's no card to say what they're actually what they're saying.
Yeah.
I think when the thin man, the spy.
Oh yeah, the tall man. Yeah.
Goes to what's his name's apartment. I don't know why I'm forgetting everybody's name.
Oh, yeah. He's the guy who gets fired. And they're all gonna meet up at his apartment. Yeah.
PH, maybe, I don't know, but yeah. So he's over there, and he finds the beanie with the name on it, Georgie 11811, and then he's explaining to him no, this is the reason why, and they don't actually show what they're saying, but we know what they're saying just because of the nature of the conversation, and moments like that, coupled with all of those huge the world building, visionary, very George Lucas shots where you get a total sense of where the scale of everything. When you're underground, you totally feel like it's under the earth and completely the steam is everywhere and all the workers are getting blown up and falling over and dying and it's terrible. And then all the ritzy parties and stuff and the 7 deadly sins scene with the Maria robot and everything. Just all of that just feels totally perfectly scaled, and it makes you really appreciate the small moments amongst this big world that's totally believable from the get-go. And that's just on top of all of the visionary stuff and the creative aspects of building that world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna agree with you here that it's kind of a marvel this movie was made. UFA, the studio that made this film, which was the German film production giant at the time, was massively in debt when this was made, and it's kind of, I mean, it's a testament to the power that Fritz Lang had at the studio that he was able to get this made, but it's also a marvel that he didn't bankrupt and kill UFA with this movie because they were already so in debt. But I don't think he made the grandest movie of all time, like, period. But I do think he made one of them. And I think he made a movie that's grand in a really unique way. Because American films of the time were grand in that they would go out to the desert and build huge sets out there in the world that they had available to them. Germany at this point is a disaster. Like, it's massively impoverished. You can't buy anything with the money. Things are run down. It's not really a country where you can go out and film something like this on locations. So you build it indoors, which is kind of where German expressionism as a filmic genre came from, is the need to build things rather than having them available to you. And I think constructing a literal metropolis within a studio environment is a really fascinating idea, and a kind of ahead of its time idea that we see in later films just as like a standard. Oh, we're making Blade Runner. We need a huge city. Let's build it in the studio. Because everything in Blade Runner is on backlots as well. And in that way, I think, like I said in my review, it set a bar for scale in science fiction and film in general that subsequent films don't necessarily fall beneath. But I think Metropolis is always there as are we hitting the Metropolis line? Like, we have to hit or go over the Metropolis line if we want to be epic. I mean, in terms of Fritz Lang's direction, we just talked about Apocalypse Now. And in a lot of ways, this movie makes me think of Apocalypse Now, and Fritz Lang makes me think of Francis Ford Coppola. Because Francis Ford Coppola was one of the first big American directors to have gone to film school. So he was one of the first big American directors who wasn't a contemporary of somebody like Fritz Lang or these silent directors. He was watching their work and going, what did they do? And what worked for them? So I think some of the sort of over-the-top, not actors director-ish tendencies that directors like Fritz Lang have rub off on the next generation, and not as in intolerant a way. But, because, I mean, you don't see something like Coppola saying, all right, starving child, run into that blasting jet of water. but I feel like those tyrannical practices set by, like, the original cinematic directors, like, influence the next generation, and then they influence the generation after them, and it softens over time. And kind of our modern understanding of how you should work with actors and how you should work on a set is kind of the final domino tipped by that aggressive domino of people like Fritz Lang. But, like, I think that he could never have had a career with those kind of practices in any time other than the 1920s. I mean, he eventually moved to America, like I said, and even there, he struggled to find work after a time because he was known as just so impossible and unpleasant to work with for actors and other crew. So it's an interesting note, I think, on how practices change over time. Okay, my last question before we go into final thoughts also is a paragraph question. But I want to talk about the edit of this film, because we watched the 148-minute edit, which is not quite the original cut, but it's as close as we have nowadays. There's still a few scenes missing, and it's been cut together from a previous existing cut and footage that was found in Argentina that is of lesser quality, but still pretty good considering how old it is. So when this film was brought to the United States, it was edited severely by Paramount. All references to the character Hel, who is Joe Frederson's wife, who is deceased, were removed because her name resembled the word hell, like from the Bible.
Terrible.
Which also
like from the Bible.
Which also meant that Rotwang in the American cut had no reason to build the Machine Man in the first place. And the hired script editor for the American version, Channing Pollock, claimed that the film represented Symbolism runs such riot that people who saw it couldn't tell what the picture was about. Fritz Lang responded, I love films, so I guess I'll never go to America. How wrong he was. But what do you guys think? Does this represent symbolism run riot over meaning, or does it all sync up pretty well in the original cut that we watched?
Fritz Lang definitely time traveled to get that sick one-liner
Yeah.
from you, Zach.
Yeah.
I just know it.
Yeah. 100%.
Unbelievable. I think for the most part, this edit is really good. There was one scene where I would have preferred if the added Argentinian reel was not added, and
okay.
it was when Mediator Boyo was talking to his dad, and there was something about he asks them, what about the workers, and he says something about they're where they belong, and then it feels like that's all that needs to be said, and then for 30 more seconds he explicitly lays out where they belong, like the big bad that he is, which is one of those little editing things like in Star Wars, a lot of scenes were trimmed where the conversation ends halfway through. Like the scene in Uncle Ben's hut is way longer in its normal cut, but it's just too much. So, I mean, that's the tiniest little nitpick. And I mean, it was definitely distracting that the quality of the footage just noticeably drops every time something from that reel they discovered in 2008 is added in. But, most of it merits being there, and being as great as it is, I would certainly weigh Fritz's artistic priorities above anything else. So,
yeah, I totally agree. I think it really doesn't hurt the pacing at all. A lot of the scenes definitely. I think they sparsed it out so well. Did they include every single scene that they found, or did they purposely edit it?
No, they have everything included, according to records of what the original cut was, according to censors' records. They have it cut together as it would have been, except for those missing bits where text is filled in to say what happened in the scene.
Yeah, and those bits of text are rare enough where it really doesn't intrude at all. I think it was really magnificently edited, honestly, and yeah, I mean the drops in quality are kind of annoying, but it also kind of lends credibility to the editing, and I also think it helps you kind of understand what the narrative was, and what the intended narrative was, and how long the scenes were supposed to be, and how much expression the characters were supposed to give. And I think it adds a lot of character to the characters, and it allows you to be a lot more invested in the scene. And I don't think for a large majority of the time they aren't absolutely necessary, honestly, but I think they definitely add more than they remove by far. I think the pacing would be the main concern, especially with this type of film today, and I think it totally works for me.
Yeah, I just remembered one other little thing. Sorry, Zach. I would have liked to have had a couple more cue cards and dialogue-heavy scenes where it's clear two or more characters are talking with one another. It felt like they only really told us exactly what was being said when they absolutely had to, which is fine and was a choice. I would have preferred to know every word, but that was just something that bothered me a tiny bit.
Yeah, and I do think we hit upon this when we talked about Nosferatu, is that a lot of silent directors really disliked cue cards because they felt they interrupted the flow of a scene. So particularly toward the late 20s, you get a lot of silent movies where they're using as few as they can, and they're kind of relying on the actors to communicate the meaning rather than the precise wording of what's being said a lot of the time. But I think it's kind of curious that this was derided as being symbolism over meaning when it came out. I mean, especially in America. I think the core complaint was probably more, this is too long, but but I don't want to look like I dislike long films, so it's too symbolic. But
there you go.
A majority of the symbolism in this film, if not, I would wager all of it, is biblical. So back in the 1920s, when the predominant assumption of studios is that they're making movies for Christian viewers because that's America's religion. It seems so weird to me that they would go, Americans aren't going to get this thing with the 7 deadly sins. It's so bizarre to me that that symbolism is where they draw the line. Is it more symbolic? especially in terms of its biblical allusions, than you would see in the standard science fiction film now, or maybe even in the standard American science fiction film at the time. I think possibly, but I think that's not really even totally true, because something like the next year's Things to Come, which is an H.G. Wells written film, because this movie came out when H.G. Wells was still alive, and he wrote a review of it, which is just such a weird thought to me. He hated it.
Too simple.
Yeah, he said it was too simplistic. And he also, this has become an H.G. Wells point, but I think he totally missed the point of the binary between the workers and the rich, because one of his core complaints is, who's consuming the produce that the workers create, if not the workers?
Wait a minute. Based.
But yeah, I think it's more kind of a cultural difference than anything, because I think the same kind of weight of biblical allusions that you get in this, you get in American films of the time, but they aren't as gothic, and they aren't as maybe kind of dark in their appearance. But I think that just kind of comes from the German and European in general tradition of portraying religion in a dark way. I mean, Germany is a country with a lot of cathedrals, and there's a lot of cathedral-like architecture in this film, and I think it's quite possible that Americans, it was presumed, would go, that doesn't seem very religious to me, just because the iconography of religion is quite different in America than it is in Germany, especially at this point in time. But yes, those are all the questions I had. Any final thoughts before we move on to our other segments?
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned UFA or UFA or whatever it is. I just think it's funny that if you go to the studio on Letterboxd, the Metropolis is the first film listed, and the next two films are Valerian and Knock Knock. So.
Valerian?
Yeah.
Wow.
No.
Yeah.
I knew
and Knock Knock is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So yeah, it doesn't.
Valerian's pretty bad too.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I know. Yeah. So I guess they've become more of a resource for like modern Western filmmakers to go, I need money.
Yeah. I guess so. I don't know. And I don't know. Just one last note in defense of idealism here. I think like there's a clear like space between cinema and reality, and gosh darn it, I think that a happy ending is productive and artful, and it certainly is here, and it feels earned to me, and it feels sincere, and yeah, just let Fritz give us a little bit of hope in these trying times of the Weimar Republic.
How the myth should have ended. He should have just gone out and held hands with the monsters.
Let me show you the
way
way.
Christian preferred. Yeah. Yeah, there's more
guys.
there's more explicit religious references in the Conjuring series than there is in this movie, okay? And The Exorcist, I mean, obviously. And like another thing, like you mentioned, Zach, like the whole the Lutheran thing and the Reformation and the Gothic stuff. Like, I think I mean, I really didn't think of this as like a religious movie. I think appropriately assessing what religious undertones are gonna work with the greater narrative without explicitly saying this is the solution to everything is really great. I think having like faith, you know, just in general, that there is a solution is something that is very like rich for creative mining in this case, and I think it works great in the historical context, in like the philosophical context and the political context. I think all of that is just really remarkable and well done. And I think at this time it would be particularly difficult to have a lasting movie in a kind of like a very like short amount of time in Germany's history, where there's a lot of stuff happening before and after the Weimar Republic. So, yeah, I think it's totally great, easily like a lightning in the bottle. Like, you know, I think anybody who's remotely interested in sci-fi as a genre and wants to know like one of the hallmarks of it very very early on, I think this is pretty necessary, and also like for silent film enthusiasts in general, but not to like the average person. Just know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Don't expect, you know, a Thanos snap at the end or something. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I agree with that. I'm not going to recommend this movie to everybody because it is, like I said, it's not the oldest movie we discussed, but it's almost 100 years old. I mean, give or take like 4 or 5 years. But I think it's a great film. I think if you want to call yourself a cinephile, I really think you have to check out some silent film at some point. And I think German Expressionism... You
gotta get judged by Zach first. Yeah.
German Expressionism is a big part of silent film. And we've covered kind of two of the bigger touchstones of German Expressionism on this podcast. We talked about Nosferatu. We've talked about Metropolis. I mean, really the only thing left would be Der Golem, which is probably my least favorite of the three. But yeah, I do recommend checking at least those two out. Nosferatu is shorter. I think this one is a little more of a brisk watch, even though it is much longer. And interestingly, the cinematographer on this film, Karl Freund, went on to direct the original Universal Mummy movie with Boris Karloff. So, yeah, lots of interesting German filmmakers who later had an influence on Hollywood filmmaking. I recommend checking it out. 4 out of 5 from me. So now it is time to move into our segment, The Week in Review. What's been up with you guys? What have you been watching, reading, working on, anything like that?
It's been a long time since Obi-Wan Kenobi ended, so I don't really want to give a whole overview on it.
Come on. Are you talking about it?
Just like so quickly, and then I'll talk about something else. The finale was really good. The show itself was fine. I think at this point you know if you're the type of person that would like it or not. It's not as good as The Mandalorian. It's probably ever so slightly better than The Book of Boba Fett, but I maybe enjoyed The Book of Boba Fett more just because Obi-Wan was not spectacular, and I felt like it needed to be to justify its existence. I gave it a 4, and then I went back to a 3.5 like Mitchell because I thought that was more fair. Speaking of like sci-fi stuff that didn't meet the Metropolis line of scale, I saw Lightyear in theaters.
Oh no.
With my parents. And man, it's really quite derivative. Like it's really hard to find an original beat in here anywhere. And what's worse is the characters. This is something you always get, I think, even out of like weaker Pixar entries. The characters are always engaging. Even in something like Cars, Mater will make you laugh beside yourself, and you'll like Owen Wilson for whatever reason. I mean, Chris Evans does a fine little Boy Scout impersonation, but Buzz just has like no personality, and he's got this sort of ragtag crew, and Taika Waititi plays one of them, and he's just unbearable, like not even a little bit funny. And who else is in this crew? Dale Soules, I don't know who that is. Soules, she's not really interesting either to me. And there's this little like toy cat named Socks, which is like the cute merchandising opportunity in this one, and even that character grew tiresome by the end for me. So boring characters, boring plot. It promises to be like this grand space adventure, but it all takes place on like one planet, and there's not even exploration of that planet really. It's just very like sterile, and it's not fun. And that's all I really want from these, is from Pixar in particular, is for it to be entertaining and somewhat emotional, and I didn't feel either of that. So 2 stars for some slick animation, but I wish they spent that money and manpower elsewhere.
Okay.
Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Hey.
Yeah. 1953. It predates Godzilla by a year, which is kind of crazy. Interesting to see how the Americans think about atomic testing versus the Japanese.
Yes.
Is what I'll say. It reminds me of Rudolph and the Abominable a little bit in the beginning. But I really liked it. I mean, it's not like totally crazy. I mean, obviously Harryhausen is groundbreaking in most things, so I'm a pretty big fan of him, and I think the effects are really honestly amazing here. And some of the best effects, honestly, of the 50s, in my opinion, when it comes to monster movies. But yeah, it's a creature feature. You get to see it destroy stuff, and the cops being stupid, and the soldiers being stupid, and these few people, and there's a romance on the side and everything. It's got everything you expect in it. But the effects for me are like what really make it stand out.
Oh, yeah.
It really becomes compelling in the final act, and you know, I'm not going to spoil too much about how it ends and everything, but I think that whole scene at the end is really the fire and all those effects and everything are super intriguing, and there's really something special about stop motion that you have to appreciate. And you can just think of, oh, look how much time it took to make that one scene. His tail like whips around like 5 times. Like that's a whole week right there or something. You're just like, what the heck's going on? But yeah, it's a really fun time. There's some real moments of peril in it that I'm relatively hooked on, but you know, it's a creature feature that's necessary for anyone who's interested in that at all, and definitely worthy of comparison to Godzilla in some aspects.
Okay. So this is another directly before we recorded watch, but I watched Halloween 2, the original sequel to John Carpenter's Halloween from 1981. Now, I am a big John Carpenter fan. There was a time when he was my favorite director. He's probably not my favorite anymore, but he's in that pantheon.
Who is now?
Because I mean, my top 3 are probably, and not in any order, are David Lynch, Brian De Palma, and Andrei Tarkovsky.
No.
Interesting.
And Carpenter kind of falls just outside the line. But I do think he's a genuinely artful director. I really like his style. I think he uses a frame beautifully. Halloween is not my favorite film from him. I think it's good. It's a 3 out of 5 for me. But I think compared to his later work, he does much more impressive things later on. Halloween 2 was not directed by John Carpenter. He wrote it and he produced it, I think, and he did the score. And a lot of the people who worked on the first one worked on the second one, but it was directed by Rick Rosenthal, who directed later films in the Halloween series. He directed a few other things, but he's a lot less known than John Carpenter. And apparently he went to a lot of pains to really make sure that Halloween 2 felt like a Halloween movie. He really wanted to replicate the tension and the patience of John Carpenter's Halloween, most of the scares kind of taking place in the background and really requiring that the viewer pay attention to what's going on in the film. And apparently John Carpenter came back during post-production and just reshot a bunch of it to make it something a lot bloodier and like a lot more overt and, in my opinion, a lot less special and a lot less interesting.
Not nice.
Which it seems so strange. It seems weird that John Carpenter was the one who saw the sequel and then went, no, I need to make sure you fumble the bag. Now, that being said, it's not bad. I think it's probably on the level with the first one, with a 3 out of 5. It's not as well made, and I don't think it's as frightening, but it is more exciting, and I don't think it's bad by any means. There are some people who go, there's such a stupid twist at the end, and it's not as well made as Halloween. 1 out of 5. I don't think this is a bad movie at all. I think it's too well shot and too well directed to get a 1 out of 5. It's 3 for me. Rick Rosenthal is not as good a director as John Carpenter, but I do think he's still a good director, and it's a perfectly fine horror film, and personally I would have been fine with this being the last movie in the Halloween series to feature Michael Myers. I would have been okay with it being an anthology series like they originally planned. But
can't have that.
Nope. You got to make 19 movies with Michael Myers, so I guess the die rolls on after Halloween 3.
And a game.
And many a game. Games. And many games. But all right, time to move on to our other segment, Mitchell's Munitions Minute. Now, I'm going to be honest. I don't remember firearms or really weapons of any kind appearing in this film. So
blow your mind.
I'm intrigued to see what Mitchell brings up in a minute. In 3, 2, 1, go.
There are 2 guns in this, Zachary. Josephat tries to commit suicide with a Lilliput pistol, okay? And then there's also a Handel Schmeisser Model 1 pistol. I'm going to focus on the Lilliput pistol because it's got a funny Lilliput pistol because it's funny, and you know why they call it that. Yes, it's because of Gulliver's Travels, because of the tiny island. It's one of the smallest firearms to ever be made. It was made in the Weimar Republic. It has a 4.25 millimeter caliber, and fun fact, Alistair MacLean for some reason thinks it's really funny, so he calls it the Luger Lilliput and incorrectly calls it a 21 caliber in a lot of his books, including Where Eagles Dare. So there you go. It was used very rarely in service, and it's very small and doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. But
okay, well that was a very interesting point, and you came in at only 45 seconds, so great job on the timing.
Thank you.
So now we move on to me continuing to speak with the Marvelous Cinema Tour. Now, it's been a while since I did one of these. We did some guested episodes, so I haven't spoken about a Marvel film in a little while. So just to get things back up to speed, I watched Ant-Man. It was fine, 3 out of 5. I think Edgar Wright would have made a better movie, but Edgar Wright is too good of a director to make a Marvel movie at this point. I watched Captain America Civil War. It was fine, 3 out of 5. I don't like the Russo brothers, but it's better than Winter Soldier. Then again, that wouldn't have been hard. And I watched Doctor Strange, which this is the first Marvel movie that I just hadn't seen. Doctor Strange was the first Marvel film I just didn't go out to see, and I didn't ask my family to rent it so we could watch it together. I just didn't care. And so I was kind of looking forward to this one, because even though I don't really love what the Marvel films have done with Doctor Strange, I think he's an interesting character. And I remember in the lead up to this film, Scott Derrickson saying that he took a lot of inspiration in his filmmaking from like psychedelic music from the 60s and 70s, which was kind of a big thing around the time that Doctor Strange was first becoming kind of a prevalent Marvel character. And he specifically mentioned Pink Floyd, who are a band that I love. So I was interested in this one. I was interested in seeing how that influence came out. And I'm not calling Scott Derrickson a liar, but I don't see that influence in this movie at all. Yes, there is a Pink Floyd song in the movie, but if you didn't know Pink Floyd, you wouldn't know that, because it's not like it's one of their more iconic songs. It's Interstellar Overdrive off of their first album, which is a great song, but it's not like it really has much of an influence on the movie in any way. I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch is very good as Doctor Strange. I think he's intensely smug and unlikable for the most part, which means that you as the viewer don't really think he deserves anything that he quote-unquote earns throughout the movie. His romance with Rachel McAdams doesn't sell at all.
Yeah.
They have zero chemistry. And Mads Mikkelsen is criminally underused. I think really the only place where it starts to feel vaguely even mystic or Doctor Strange or psychedelic inspired at all is the finale, the infamous Dormammu I've come to bargain sequence, which I will say the movie earns some points for concluding in a way that doesn't just involve somebody punching the villain really hard, and then they punch them hard, and then the hero realizes that he has to learn from what he learned previous in the film and punch them even harder. There is actually some thought and intelligence put into dispatching the villain here through the use of a time loop, which I think is worth some recognition. But yeah, I thought that Age of Ultron was going to be where these movies started to feel like they were being made by a previs team first and a director second. And it kind of was, but I could still sort of feel Joss Whedon in that movie. I think this is where that really starts to happen, because I like Scott Derrickson, I like Sinister, I like some of his other films. I'm intrigued to see The Black Phone. I don't see any Scott Derrickson in this movie at all. All I see is visual effects and a vaguely Russo brothers looking gray sludge over everything. So 2 out of 5. I was pretty disappointed by this one. Next up is, I don't even remember. This is starting to wear on me a little. I've reached kind of the point where the Marvelous Cinema Tour has stopped being fun and has become just wanting to get to the next stop so I can get off the train.
Was.
But
the train never stops, Zach. It never stops.
Release date, earliest. Your next one is Guardians 2.
Okay.
Ooh.
All right.
That'll be interesting.
I'm going to admit I didn't really love that one either when it first came out. But it is at least... Guardians was the one I've enjoyed the most so far on this tour. So meeting up with those characters and that director again will at least be something to look forward to, I guess. But now it's time to move on to our oldest segment, The Rundown. Christian, would you like to take over?
Sure. We made it. I hope Mitchell's ready to be sent to the Weimar Republic again. I don't know.
I hate that place.
All right, yeah. 1 minute. We quiz for numbers. Zach, are you ready?
Yeah.
You're going to start us off?
Okay.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1, go.
Mediation.
3 to 5.
Tarkin-esque dad.
4 to 5.
Town square alarm bell.
4 to 5.
Speaking the same language and not understanding each other.
4 to 5.
Kitties.
4 to 5.
A machine man.
5 to 5.
A mere mortal.
4 to 5.
Damaged Argentinian reel footage.
3 to 5.
Subterranean chapels.
4 to 5.
The power of prayer.
3 to 5.
Chosen ones.
4 to 5.
The legend of the Tower of Babel.
4 to 5.
Pleated trousers.
3 to 5.
Ham-fisted class commentary.
2 out of 5.
Seizing the means of production.
1 out of 5.
A girl named Maria.
4 out of 5.
German expressionism.
4 to 5.
Winking and nodding.
4 to 5.
Bonfires.
4 to 5.
Sussy dance routine.
3 to 5.
Mad scientists.
3 to 5.
C-3PO inspiration. 1 second.
4 to 5.
Robotic hands.
Time.
Oh.
Alrighty.
Alrighty. Well, folks, we've reached the end of our Metropolis discussion, but we will be back next time. What will we be talking about next time, Mitchell?
I can't. There's no way I can prepare for this right now. There's no.
Do we want to leave them in alerts? Because we can't.
No, no. All I can say is.
Oh,
Okay.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
The Lion King, 1994. You already know. You already know. So I've never actually seen this film in its entirety. Like actually watched it.
Wow.
Really?
Watched it. Yes, I've never watched it.
Oh my god.
Like fully from beginning to end. I don't know why, but I'm gonna watch it from beginning to end, and I'm gonna talk about it. We're all gonna talk about it, and it's gonna be a fun time.
I haven't in years. I've seen it more recently on stage in London than I've seen it on the screen.
Wow.
So that's an indicator of how long ago that was. So that's at least 8 years at this point. Quite. I mean, actually, definitely more. So yeah, if you'd like to listen to our discussion on The Lion King, the original, nobody's getting me to watch that one again, the other one again. Then tune in next time. Until then, what's goodbye in German? Goodbye. We'll be back next time.
Goodbye.
That was offensive, Zach.